Welcome, everyone. I'm Naomi Baum, the Chief Operating Officer of the American Council for an Energy Efficient Economy, or ACEEE. We are a nonprofit research and advocacy organization which works to advance energy efficiency policies, programs, technologies, investments, and behaviors. If you want to learn more about our work, you can check out our website at aceeee.org. As part of my role here at ACEEE, I oversee two of our research programs, including our Behavior and Human Dimensions research program, and for the last few years, I've also served as one of the co-chairs for the Behavior, Energy, and Climate Change Conference, or BECC. BECC is a unique conference in that it brings together individuals who don't always have the opportunity to share knowledge. Researchers, policymakers, utility program implementers, and businesses focused on energy and behavior to achieve actionable climate solutions. BECC is in its 12th year, and it's co-convened by UC Berkeley, Stanford University, and ACEEE. Since its inception, we've helped spark the creation of companion conferences in Europe and Japan, and this year we've started a webinar series to present this research throughout the year, and today we're presenting the 6th webinar in our series. We would love to see you at this year's BECC conference, which is taking place in Sacramento, California, from November 17th to 20th, and you can register on our website, becconference.org. Today's webinar will touch on one of many topics that will be discussed at this year's BECC conference. Your speakers are two BECC veterans and two really terrific speakers, I should add, ICF's Jean Rodriguez and PG&E's Susan Norris, who will be introduced before their presentations. They'll be discussing interdisciplinary collaboration as a strategy for creative program design and problem solving. And now with that, I'd like to turn things back over to Maxine, who will begin the webinar.
Okay, thank you, Naomi. Welcome, everyone. As I mentioned, I'm the Communications Associate at ACEEE. I work on marketing for the BECC conference and have contributed to several projects housed under ACEEE's Behavior and Human Dimensions program. Just a few logistics. Before we begin, I'd like to note a few things. All attendees are in listen-only mode. Following our speakers' remarks, we'll open up the webinar for questions. And throughout the presentations, if you have any questions, please type them into the chat box, and we'll address them as we go on. And finally, this webinar is being recorded, so we will send out a link to registrants as well as the presentation after we're done. Now I'd like to introduce our first speaker for today, Suzanne Norris. She's the Principal Product Manager at Pacific Gas and Electric Company. Suzanne works with internal teams made up of stakeholders at every level of an organization to embrace their potential as original thinkers and drive real change within their organizations. She uses a strategic design framework which blends social science and design to identify opportunities and develop solutions that are aimed at the right problems and go beyond the status quo. Suzanne, I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks. Can you bring up my first slide? Thank you. Hi, everyone, and thanks for having me. I hope you are all going to engage well. It may not be a surprise to know that that framework that I apply, I learned at a BECC session. It was one of the post-session or post-conference workshops that I attended that Sea Change Institute facilitated, and so that framework is something that I interweave into the work that I do now. Before I really dive in, I want everybody to get something to draw with and something to draw on. And although I cannot be in the room with you, which I wish I could be, it's really important that you participate in this effort. What I'm going to go through might not seem connected to the topic, but I promise you it'll make sense in the end, or maybe not. Can you click, please? Are you there? Did you click? Click, click. So I'm really talking about this habit of continually thinking and doing things in new ways to make a positive difference. So habit is something that we talk about at BECC a lot. It's changing behaviors. Click. The first thing I want to do is just explore what makes me motivated. I'm what you might call as a creative, dissatisfied type person. I'm constantly on the lookout for ways to do something better. And I have a knack for making these disparate connections and seeing opportunities that a lot of times other people don't see, or if they see it, they don't talk about it. And a lot of that came from some tools that I learned a long time ago from a book called A Whack on the Side of the Head when I used to work as a promotions and marketing director in a top 40 radio station. And I'll tell you all about that when we're back together. But I've honed these over the years by working with other people and learning other methods that they apply, including with a very good friend of mine, a comedian who's taught me a lot of stuff from performance and writing jokes and how working in improv on how to use that to actually spur more creativity. Theodore Levitt, a professor at Harvard Business School, is quoted as saying, creativity thinks up new things and innovation does new things. So I want to apply both. I want to make sure that we're being creative and innovative and also doing something with that. So the first thing I want you all to do, this is a little exercise that I have for everyone. I want you all, when I say go, I want you to choose. I'm going to ask you to draw something on that thing that you chose to draw on with that thing that you chose to draw with. So I'm guessing it's probably a piece of paper and a pencil or pen. So when I say go, I'm going to give you 10 seconds to draw what I tell you to draw. Ready, set, draw a house. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Next slide, please. I'm guessing that everyone drew this house or something that looks a lot like it. And that's because a lot of your experience and expertise and the information that you have stored in your brain's default database shapes how you interact with the world. And we all, let's just face it, our brains are lazy. We make these mental shortcuts, and it's really important. Otherwise, it would be we'd all be very tired at the end of the day because thinking burns cognitive fuel, and when you run out of that fuel, you get really sloggy and you can't think anymore. And we've all gotten to the point where it's like, I can't think of the word. I've got this word I want to say, or I've got this person's name I want to remember. And a lot of times that happens towards the end of the day when you've been thinking a lot all day long. So it's really important that we learn how to run on autopilot a lot of the time. And that shortcut database, though, becomes this huge barrier to creative thinking because our subconscious pipes in and tells you, nope, this is what you should be thinking. Don't think creatively. So your default database or these mental shortcuts that we have can get in the way. Next slide. Repetition and status quo are really easy and they're safe and they're tried and they're true and they're tested, but they often do not generate anything new or innovative. I'm going to just quickly cover some tools and tactics to help you shift out of that default database and generate new ideas. But you have to really consciously try to do it. You have to be aware that you're stuck and then choose to shift. Einstein said nothing happens until something moves, so let's get moving. Next slide. The number one barrier to original thinking is judgment. Ideas get stuck or diluted or killed as they move through this judgment process. And I can guarantee you every single person in this room has said, what if we, and somebody said, we can't, or we, no. And that, depending on who says that, can really squash creativity and innovation. Next slide. What we have to realize is that in their seedling state, ideas are really rough and not fully fleshed out. And we don't know whether this is a tree or a weed or a flower or some food to eat that will nourish us. But we need to learn to stop the judgment and start considering how this idea needs to be nurtured first and get into that space where in this judgment stage where we stop that judgment and we start to nurture the idea. Next slide. One of the best ways to nurture an idea and help grow it is to use this yes and tool, which is a tool founded in improvisational theater and improvisational comedy. It doesn't always have to be funny though, by the way. The fun is always on the other side of yes because it grows the idea. What I often think about is when you're in a conversation with someone, and a lot of times if anybody has ever taken an improv class, they talk about passing the ball. In a game, you pass the ball to the other person, and in improv, you pass the ball, but you pack something else on the ball before you hand it over. If you keep the ball and you only play with the ball yourself, it never grows because you never give it to somebody else to add something new to. So yes, anding, add something new. Next slide, please. I will warn you, this slide has lots of clicks. So click the first one. The first stage is this deductive thinking. Click again. when we're in this no because phase of creative thinking, where I have an idea and somebody says, no, because we have to do this, you can't actually grow the idea. It's deductive. It's already reducing the thoughts down to all the reasons why it might not be possible. Next, click twice. If you get into the no and, you're actually not growing the idea. The other person is taking the ball and running in a completely different direction than growing that idea and adding on to the idea. Click 2 more times. If you're yes becauseing, then you're a passenger. You're just going along, you're riding along, you're just saying, okay, you can pass the ball now. I like what's going on. You're not adding to the idea. You're just saying, yes, 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 sounds great. You're kind of a passenger in the car and not driving or guiding it, not growing it. What we want is to yes and. We want to get into this inductive mode where we're growing and growing and growing the idea before we move into judgment. Next slide. One of the other tools you can do, next slide, is shift the way you use words. Ban words like can't and add words like how might we. You can click the next slide, please. This is a tool that came out of IDEO and the design thinking gurus that shift from words on we always do it this way or the no buts to say our new vocabulary is how might we. And if you click 3 times, how signals improvement and possibility, might allows us to consider a wild idea or the possibility, and we means we're all going to own this. Next slide. So in summary, one of the steps that we're going to talk about is this judgment and avoiding premature evaluation is to use those yes ands and how might we versus can't and no buts or no becauses. The next tool I'm going to teach you, next slide, is to play. And I am so happy to be, again, the 2nd year in a row, I think, that I own, quote unquote, the chill room at BECC, where I fill this room full of stuff to play with. And this year, I really want to hear how you play and how you get out of your mundane task world, because there's a really close relationship between the ha-has and the ahas, and I want to help you find that. Stuart Brown talks a lot about how play leads to brain plasticity, adaptability, and creativity, and nothing fires up the brain like play. Excuse me. Greg McKeown said in Essentialism, very successful people see play as essential for creativity. Next slide. So I want you to think for just a second where you are and what you're doing when you have the best ideas. And I'm guessing that it's when you're just waking up in the morning, maybe in the shower, walking the dog, or maybe as you're falling off to sleep. So in order to have effective brainstorming, it's important that you prime your team and let them literally go home, go sleep on it, and then come in with another idea situation, because that's when your brain starts to move, next slide please, into this different stage. Click the first button. So your brain has these different stages, and I'm just going to talk about 4 of them today. But the first one is this busy beta, the thing that we're in now. We're awake, we're conscious, and we're working. Next, click. The next phase is this amazing alpha state where you're in this default mode, where you're creatively visualizing, you're calm, you're relaxed, you're lucid, you might be daydreaming. And this is where you might be folding the laundry or taking that walk, or I'm a big fan of vacuuming. So I like to clean my house. And when I do that stuff, I don't listen to anything. I don't fill the space with other information that will prevent me from just allowing my brain to go into neutral mode and start to make those disparate creative connections. Next, click. Then you have thinking theta. And this is when you're in deep relaxation or meditation. And you've heard a lot of leaders these days talk about how meditation is so helpful, not only for relaxation, but it really does start to move that brain state into this creative thinking phase, and into the zone. And this is why I talk about hacking your brain. If you call it out, if you start to move your brain purposely into these 2 states, whether you decide to do a mundane task during the day, I'm going to take a walk and I'm not going to listen to a podcast or music while I do it. I'm going to meditate for 20 minutes, 10 minutes, so that I can just move my brain into this deep relaxation state. I'm going to plant this seed. I need to figure out X. and then go do that stuff, a lot of times you'll actually figure stuff out while you're in that zone. And the next state, click, is this, I'm asleep, I'm dreamless. And that is also important, because if you do not get into these deep sleep states, you can't, I crassly say this is when your brain purges or poops. That's the only time your brain has to do that. You don't have a natural pump to shed waste in the brain. So it's imperative that you get into these deep sleep states. And if you're in light sleep, that moves the stuff out of your short-term memory into long-term memory. So you need these both of these sleep states in order to actually give yourself more RAM so that you can take in more information and store it. Next slide. Go ahead and click twice. The next thing I want to talk about are some tools that you can apply with your teams as you start to think about creative exercises. The first one is called making metaphors. And this is just a great way to take some unfamiliar concept and use random stimulus to force a connection back to your issue. Next slide. This is an example, if anybody's done the Gmure paperclip exercise, where you take the paperclip and think about the 9 million things you can do with it. Instead of thinking, what is it? Think, what can I do with this? And I literally draw this picture on my whiteboard. I stick whatever it is in the middle, and then I say, what could we do with it? What are its values, attributes, features, structures? And then you can stop and say, how might it help me solve the problem? If you go to the next slide. This is an exercise I did with my comedian friend, because he was teaching me how to use this tool to write a joke. And he said, we take a light bulb and we stick it in the middle, and we start to talk about all the attributes. And then you might hone in on one of them, that it's really bright. And then you draw another line in a bubble from there. And what are the attributes of bright? What are things that are bright? Stars and the sun and this and that. And then he says, then you get to this joke where you say, my mom has a lamp in her house that's so bright, every time you turn it on, 3 wise men show up at the door. Ha, 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 ha. But that's how I was like, oh my God, I use this tool to get creative ideas. So if I'm trying to solve for something, and I write my what if statement or what I'm trying to accomplish, and then I go like, okay, let's use a light bulb as stimulus. It's an exercise you can do with your teams. And if I've totally confused you in this very short example of this, we can talk about it when we're at BECC. The next slide is another tool that you can do, is what's called role play. And this is when you actually imagine that you are the problem or the idea or the solution, and you think about how someone else might solve it. And so you will role play. Go ahead to the next slide. And you can say, who else, go ahead and click, who else might have solved this issue? Call on this alternative or diverse perspective to help describe your issue, to help talk about how they might look at it, to really break out of that thinking that only you have, right? That only your experiences and your structures allow you to have. And if you think about how might my mom solve this problem, all of a sudden her perspective and her level of experience and her level of expertise with the problem is going to shift. How might a BECC presenter that you may meet at the sessions or may meet during the social times solve this problem based on their expertise and their experience and their abilities? It's really important that you start to meet these new people and connect with other ways and other people doing things. And this is where you can sit in a room with your staff and go like, first of all, who else might have already done this? And let's call upon them. But let's imagine, Tony, I want you to pretend that you're an orchestra conductor. And what we know about orchestra conductors and what we don't know about orchestra conductors, we're going to explain the problem to you, and you're going to tell us what you would do if you were this orchestra conductor. And it's just a lot of fun, and it also helps you generate a lot more new ideas. And again, no judgment, just generate the ideas. Next slide. And this is my last tool that I'm going to explain today before I hand it over to Jean. Be an explorer. Lovers of wisdom must open their minds to many things. And that means you need to expand your brain's database so that you have a broader set of information to draw upon. You can do things yourself. Take a magic class. Take some acting or performance classes. I told you about my improv fun. Go to a junkyard or go to a flea market. and look at stuff from a perspective of how might I use that? How could that be useful? Not like, oh my God, look at that, that's terrible. Who would have had that in their house now it's for sale here? But think about how you might apply it. I'm a huge fan of watching drunk history. Read Reddit posts. Go to plays that are outside of your comfort zone or outside of your interests. Stretch outside that zone. Take a walk, but take a walk in a different route than what you typically go. I am a huge fan of using Google Maps to navigate me to another place, and it's like, here's an alternate route. Do you want to take it? And I'm like, yes, please, because I want to explore different ways. Where will this take me today? What might I see? What might I discover? What might I learn? And be that explorer. And how that ties back to BECC is you are going to have these opportunities during the conference to hear hundreds of different people who have tried something new, tried something old in a different way, researched something, done something different or interesting, and or do something. I've run into people who, she runs the sustainability stuff at the California Academy of Sciences. I mean, I never would have met her had I not been introduced to her at a BECC conference. And it's just another networking connection that if I have something I'm sitting here thinking, how might I get energy efficiency to the masses? Well, they serve millions of people each year there. So I made this connection, and now we connect when we want to try to see if we can collaborate. So those are things that are not found in other places. The thing that BECC brings is this audience of very like-minded people with very different experiences and very different approaches. And if you click the last slide. I'm sorry, that was my where else, which was think about where else this has been solved, but I talked a little bit about that and try to apply that as well. Go ahead to the last slide. So this is just in summary. Play is what I do for a living. The work comes in organizing the results of the play. We've talked a lot about expansive thinking. There's a whole nother step to this process, which is how do you then reduce those ideas into something that you can share with your organization and evaluate realistically and put on some maps to determine what can be done and what not done. But these are some of the tools that you can apply to grow the bucket of ideas that you can then move into that judgment and evaluation stage. And again, one of the most important tools is to explore and meet new people and try to apply those experiences and tools to your problem. And I'm going to pass it off to Jean now.
Thank you, Susan. I will now introduce Jean. Jean is Vice President of Market Development at ICF, a global strategic consulting and professional services company that helps companies and governments to plan, design, and implement transformative programs and projects. Prior to joining ICF, Jean oversaw all aspects of Southern California Edison's demand-side management strategy and programs. He has also served in an advisory capacity to numerous initiatives over the last 29 years, including as a member of the executive leadership group for the U.S. Department of Energy and the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency-led State Energy Efficiency Action Network, and as a board member of ACEEE. Jean?
Thank you very much, Maxine. Go ahead and push to my first slide. And aloha, everybody. Today, I'm going to talk to you about finding inspiration. But it's not going to be the Hallmark card kind of inspiration in which you find bliss and you just kind of mellow out. No, this is going to be inspiration that you can use in your lives, in your work, to make a meaningful difference in how well you solve problems. You know, Thomas Edison once famously said that genius is 1% inspiration, but 99% perspiration. Another great man, another great mind was Wilfred Navalta. And Wilfred once said, Gene, hit smarter, not harder. Well, what is it that these two gentlemen have in common? Well, first, obviously, their love of alliteration. But really what we're going to get to, and we're going to talk about these fellows a bit later in today's discussion, really what they get to is that there are tools and understanding that go in to truly finding inspiration. So let's go to the next slide, Maxine, so that we can start talking about that. So let's look way back. For you liberal arts majors out there, you will recognize the 9 muses of Greek mythology. We're going to start off right now. I'm going to challenge you time and time again during this talk. My first challenge to you is to be a muse and to be amused. These 9 muses of Greek mythology, they're the deities who gave artists, philosophers, and regular schmoes like you and me the inspiration necessary for artistic creativity. People used to like to say, the muse is upon me. Well, what can we learn from these ancient Greeks? I know there's at least 1 or 2 cynics out there who are thinking, yeah, I didn't take liberal arts. I'm going to tell you right now, each and every one of us on this call can learn 3 things from the muses. Number 1, the ancient Greeks would appeal to the muses. When? At the very start of their endeavor. Here's a case in point. For those of you who are familiar with the Iliad and the Odyssey, I will tell you in the very first pages of those great works, Homer appeals to the muses for their help in telling the story in the way that it should be told. So too, my friends, should you. So too should you. Each of us, if we really want to do our best thinking, if we really want to find how to tap into the inspiration that will lead us to a better solution, we need to look for that at the outset of our exploration, at the outset of our effort. How many times have those of us sitting on this call today got started on a project and you're banging away, words are on the page, frameworks are being developed, et cetera, and then you get stuck. Why do you get stuck? Because you go down a path from the outset that is your default setting, and you did not allow at the very outset for other approaches, other perspectives, other ideas to come into play. So thing number 1, appeal to the muses at the start of your endeavor. Thing number 2, these ancient Greeks would give themselves over to the muses. And so too, my friends, should you. Well, what do I mean by that? Exactly what Susan was just talking to you about. We need, for all our button-down lives and our very serious demeanors in the workplace, we need to find a way to be open again, to be open to new ideas, to be open to playfulness, to be open to creative thinking. That's what the muses did for the ancient Greeks. They can do that for you too. And number 3, Susan, this one's for you. You need to check your sources, because as I was Googling through history of the muses, I discovered that there's actually a K-pop band called the 9 Muses. They're actually quite a big deal. So Susan, you tell your friends at the pop radio station about them. Everyone else, just pay attention to things 1 and 2. Let's start and let's be open. Let's go to the next slide, please, Maxine. Here's somebody else I want you to meet. Everyone, meet Alan. Now, Alan is a friend of mine. His real name is Alan Gregerman. He's the CEO of a strategy consulting firm that focuses on innovation. He's an author, and among a great list of tremendous accomplishments, he also served as the first visiting scholar on entrepreneurship and innovation at the Library of Congress. But what I'm going to do right now is steal from Alan and give to you, my friends. See, Alan is an author of 3 different books, each of which that I have theses that I think you would find very, very, very important. So I'll tell you a little bit in a Cliff's Notes version about those books so that you can be hopefully inspired to go buy them. If not, well, Alan has done his job and helped us out anyway. First book that I will discuss that Alan wrote was called Lessons from the Sandbox. The thesis of that book was that each and every one of us, when we were children, were gifted with, born with, and had access to gifts, abilities, openness that we lose over time as we become more and more serious. So we constrain our thinking, we constrain ourselves. So the lessons from the sandbox were about finding a way to get back in tap with that with which we were naturally endowed from our start. His second book was called Surrounded by Geniuses. Now, I know some of you work in an office where you probably have one of those corny posters up that says, how can I soar with the eagles when I'm surrounded by turkeys? What I'm going to tell you right now, my friends, that person who has that poster is wrong, wrong, wrong. Each and every one of us has a perspective, an idea, an approach that can be used to broaden our own thinking. That is the thesis of Alan's second book, Surrounded by Geniuses. We need to tap into that as one of the hacks we're going to talk about in a little bit. And his third book was called Necessity of Strangers. The Necessity of Strangers could have been called Interdisciplinary Collaboration, the topic of today's webinar. The Necessity of Strangers brought about this notion that we all know to be true, that true business innovation, that those things that we think are transformational and changing our lives, they don't come from invention in this case meaning the development of something brand new that's never been thought of and never been done before. No, real innovation in the world that we live in comes from changing the application of something that's been used, that's been useful, that's been practiced and produced in some other venture, in some other application, in some other way, and adapting it to the problems, the situations, the opportunities that we're trying to deal with. So this necessity of strangers idea is that if we really want to be innovative, quit just looking in the mirror and quit just looking around the room at those folks you work with every day. We need to invite in some others. So let's say goodbye to Alan and move to the next slide. What it is that I'm going to spend the rest of today's talk about is going to allow us to get googly. And by get googly, I'm obviously making kind of a goofy reference to the Google Ventures approach to finding inspiration, to finding new ideas. And throughout the approach that I'm going to talk about for the rest of today, which is going to be a little structured, I'm going to stay away from the conceptual, although it will be kind of high level. And I'm not going to go to hypothetical. I'm going to tell you about what we use at ICF in our area of practice called the Spark Labs strategy offering, how we at the Spark Labs team bring utilities, Fortune 100 companies, airports, and even the federal government new ways, new processes for allowing everyone to get the hacks flowing. So if you want to learn more about that, talk to me later. The purpose of today is not to get into the details of what we do, but to talk instead at a much higher level about the three phases of this strategy offering that can be applied by each and every one of us on the talk today. And those three phases are three things: lightning, sprint, and blueprint. So you ready to learn more about lightning, sprint, and blueprint? Well, let's go. Next slide, please. Lightning. If I say the word lightning, I ask you right now, what do you think of? Well, some of you are going to say, well, lightning fast, of course. Of course, that not lightning fast notion is something, the flash of a light, a bolt of blue type of thing. Others around the phone will probably say, well, grease lightning, probably the worst song ever recorded in the history of mankind, in a movie starring Olivia Newton-John and whoever that other guy was. Or some of you who have maybe more of a techie background think of catching lightning in a bottle, a phrase that finds its way into Silicon Valley probably way too often and is overused. Or maybe, and hopefully, all of us are thinking about the lightning sessions that occur at BECC that are both exciting and informative. And I certainly hope to see you all at BECC at some of our lightning sections. Well, doesn't matter what you think of when you think of lightning. All of these connotations actually are applicable to the first phase of the approach that I'm going to discuss. And Maxine, if you go to the next slide, that first phase is what we call at the Spark Labs team a lightning workshop. Again, this is built off of the Google Ventures approach and toolkit, but it's a highly collaborative strategy workshop. So by collaborative, what am I talking about here? It's not being nice, although that is part of the process. When you're having fun, it's easier to be nice to people. It's about inviting Alan Gregerman strangers into the room. So it's not just you, and it's not just you and your team. It's the other stakeholders from within your company who have a horse in the race. It's bringing in other people, or people like me is how we do this for the energy space, to bring in perspectives from other utilities, observations and perspectives for utilities from other parts of the country. It's for bringing in people who have nothing to do with your industry, who have tackled similar problems. This collaboration is with a group of strangers that will help open your thinking, and that's what becomes important around the collaboration. It's a strategy workshop, so you wind up at still working at a strategic level, but it is a roll up your sleeve opportunity. And last but not least, it gets into key challenges and opportunities. As you and I sit here today, you know and I know, if you picture yourself in a room for one of these one-day lightning workshops, you can picture the face, the grumpy face of that one person who comes into every meeting filled with an encyclopedic knowledge of why things cannot be done in your regulated company, or in your company that has a fiduciary obligation to shareholders, or your company has done something some way for the last 2,000 years. That person will have challenges to raise. The key to a lightning workshop is to get alignment about how to move from identifying and recognizing a challenge to, as Susan pointed out, how might we approaches to get around that challenge. So don't ignore the challenge. The idea is to figure how to get past it. So that's phase one, the lightning workshop. Go to number 2. Remember the next slide, please. Remember the next topic that I want to talk about is the notion of sprint. Well, everyone knows what the connotations of sprint are, and we spent all our time talking about being fast, etc. On the last one. So let me ask you all a different question. How does one run faster than everybody else? How does one run faster than everybody else? Well, if we were to bring Thomas Edison back for a moment, Thomas Edison and his 99% perspiration, he would say, oh, well, it's all about training. It's all about application. It's all about working hard. And that's a pretty good assessment. All of that is true. But look at this photo, my friends. Every one of these people are working hard. Every one of these people have trained. So that can't be the whole of the answer. And you'll remember I made reference to Wilfred Nabalta, and I didn't properly introduce him, so let me do so now. Wilfred Nabalta was my volleyball coach back in college. And it never ceased to amaze him that if I would hop up feeling all full of myself and take a big, massive swing at the volleyball and hit it right into the hands of the opposing team's blockers, and the ball would come down at my feet and they would score a point. It never seemed to, I never seemed to learn what Will wanted me to learn, which was, instead of trying with brute force to blast my way through a block that's there to stop me, why don't I just hit a little smarter and hit around the block or off the top of the hands? So even though this is kind of corny, blast from the past story, it's the concept. It's the concept that we need to know, which is these guys in this photo, they're fast because they work hard. That's true. But there's also the fact that what makes one of these guys faster than the other is because that one person is not working any harder than he needs to. Think about that. The reason he's not working any harder than he needs to is because of mechanical efficiency. And we are in an industry that is absolutely obsessed with efficiency. That one person who's going to win this race applies every ounce of output and effort to the ground in a way that propels him forward just a little more efficiently than the others on that start line. And that notion of mechanical efficiency is what a design sprint is all about. So Maxine, if you go to the next slide, the design sprint is the second phase of our three-step process. Remember, we started with lightning, now we're at the sprint. The design sprint is kind of a 4-stage, 5-day workshop that tries to accomplish, that does accomplish in 5 days what it normally takes months for a normal business practice to achieve. You start off using this Google Ventures process platform by mapping and sketching out all of your how might we solutions. And you get a universe of opportunities, so lots of wonderful ideas. And even though every one of them is on the board, you're clearly not going to deal with them. So then you need to start narrowing down by deciding which ones you are going to work on and then storyboarding them, so expanding yet again. And from there, you go into a prototyping process. I don't mean a fully fleshed out built thing, but you figure a way to create a physical or visual hypothesis that can be tested with customers to see if it makes sense. So that's the design sprint process. Again, for anyone who wants to learn more detail about it, talk to me later. Hopefully talk to me at BECC if they're going to be there with me. But let's jump on to the third phase of our process. Now, the third phase of our process is to blueprint. And right now, I see somebody behind the screen here is going, wait, no, that's not right. You do a blueprint before you build a house. The blueprint is the starting point. And let me just say to you, have you learned nothing from the muses? If you use the blueprinting process, that detailed approach for what you are and are not going to do as you try to find your way to the solution, then the muses cannot visit upon you and you cannot find that creativity. Don't allow a blueprinting process to be a constraint by putting it at the beginning of your examination of what you should be doing. Instead, let's go to the next slide. Instead, blueprint at the end, so that after you've allowed in the strangers, after you've unlocked your inner children, the sense of playfulness, that creativity that we're all born with, then, my friends, you're able to find your way down a deductive process to pick the solutions that actually do make sense to your customers and capture them in a service blueprint that is aimed at ensuring that you actually achieve the end results, the benefits that you're looking for, not just the process. So that's where we started, and that's where we're going to go next. The blueprint is the last stage of lightning workshops, design sprints, and service blueprints that allows you to not only unleash creativity, to not only invite in interdisciplinary cooperation and collaboration, but to capture business results with a level of creativity and also a level of rigor that ensures success. So that's the end of my introduction of this kind of three-phase process to you. So let me close with just 3 quick thoughts. Next slide, Maxine. Please, everyone, when we leave today's talk, Susan and I hope that you will leave and be inspired, and not necessarily by us, but by with every stranger you meet out there. Talk to people, learn from people, and my goodness sake, if you go to BECC, go engage with people who are not the normal people you work with. Learn from them, be inspired by them. And next slide. And as the other part of that trade, be inspiring. You have much to offer. Make sure that if you're a practitioner, you talk to an academic and you tell them how you're solving your problems. That, my friends, is how we lock in to our own DNA, to our own codes, this notion of becoming truly more effective. And last but not least, the last slide, Maxine, on behalf of Susan and myself, let me thank you for listening to us today. And in fact, to me, it's grateful for the honor and the privilege of meeting all you strangers today. I will be even more grateful and more excited to see you guys at BECC. For those of you who can make it, it is absolutely, absolutely the place to get back in touch with what makes you special, with what makes you creative, and what makes you effective in the work that you do in the world. And I turn it back over with those thanks to Maxine. Thank you all.
Okay, thank you so much, Jean, and thank you, Susan. Again, as I mentioned earlier, if you have any questions, please type them into the chat box and we can address those now. And while we give people a chance to do that, this is a question to both Jean and Susan. Could you give specific examples of how you've used some of these strategies that you've gone over in your day-to-day work?
Who wants to go first? I'll
Susan,
just start.
I was blathering. You go first.
You were blathering on mute like I was doing earlier. I'll say once you start putting some of these tools into practice, or all of the tools into practice, you can't not use them. And I will add, you will take your lumps for it. So when you're sitting in a meeting and you say, have we thought about how we might, and they're like, we've already figured out what the problem is and what the solution is. And you're sitting here going, I think that you're missing something. And people get frustrated by that. But I will add, if you have an organization that is really open and understanding that this phase or this stage of development is necessary, then you have an organization where you can actually signal in meetings that this is a growth meeting. This is a meeting when we are ideating, we are, whatever your catchphrase might be in your group, we ban the can't, we stop the no becauses, and we shift our language in the meeting and we apply these tools. Depending on what might happen. I'm also a huge fan of saying, okay, I need your collective wisdom to help solve this issue. Here's what I think the problem is. Go sleep on it. You'll often hear me say, go sleep on it and let's get back together tomorrow, or ping me if you think of something. And I also sleep with, nerdily, a little stack of index cards and a pen by my bed. And they're white and my pen is black because I do not really want to wake up. I just want to write it down. So I need to be able to write big enough that I can read what I wrote in my half dreamy sleep state. But often I will pull those cards in the morning and go like, oh my gosh, that's exactly what I was thinking of. And I promise you, if you do not write it down, it will be gone, because that's how your brain works. So that's I can't not apply them. And I often find like teams will seek you out, those who know how to do these things, teams will seek you out because it's fun. It gets people moving the part of their brain and their body that they don't get a chance to do very often in the corporate structure or in academia. And so these exercises are fun and they can really be energizing. And when you're having fun, again, aha is often on the other side of ha-ha. So it's really, really important to interject and inject some of that fun and creativity into the space so you can generate more ideas.
Yeah, and Maxine, this is Gino again. Let me just add a hallelujah to the choir that Susan just sung for us. It's absolutely the case. If and to the extent you're willing to turn yourself over to processes that allow you to hack into more creative solutioning, you're going to find, number one, from a very boring business perspective, it works. Your best solutions, the things you're most proud of that you created, have had a spark of creativity to them. Think back. What are the biggest things you've done in your grade school days or in your workplace? The biggest accomplishments you've obtained and best results you've obtained didn't come from just grinding away at something. It came because there was a spark of creativity. So don't have to trust Susan. Don't have to trust Jean. I would say that if you think that Silicon Valley, which for better or worse is in the process as we speak of changing everything we do and live and how we interact in a digital world, if you believe that transformation came about by accident, shame on you. It came about because the Silicon Valley digital geniuses use these very sorts of processes to create everything from shiny iPods to Google search engines that have changed the way we live and breathe. These approaches, hacks, tactics, processes work. And finally, to Susan's point, the other reason you will never move away from it once you do start applying it to everyday issues, everyday problems, is that it is fun. Remember, I started off saying to be amused and to be amused. We are all a little more fun when we are playful and when we are creative. You will enjoy it and you will be more productive for it.
Okay, well, thank you, Jean, and thank you, Susan. I'm not seeing any additional questions, so I think we can end a little bit early, unless you had something you wanted to add. I just wanted to thank everybody for joining today's webinar, Hack Your Program Design Process, Interdisciplinary Collaboration for Creative Problem Solving. Within the next day, we will send a link of the recording and the presentation. And again, just as a reminder, please be sure to check out the BECC conference page. You can do that by searching the Behavior, Energy, Climate Change Conference or going to beccconference.org. And thank you. Enjoy the rest of your day.